my name is Joe Jackson. I'm a journalist, author, interviewer, and broadcaster. But before and beyond all that, I was and I am an Elvis fan. So much so that on the day Elvis died, August the 16th, 1977, my mother phoned my girlfriend and said, "Will you phone Joseph and tell him the news? I know Elvis was his life and this will break his heart." And of course it did. It also turned my life inside out and upside down. But in what I saw as perhaps one final gift from the king, his death led to the birth of my career as a journalist. After reading 7 or so obituaries for the man, I phoned the editor of an Irish magazine and suggested that none of them got even close to capturing what Elvis's death meant to true fans. I asked him, could I at least try to write such an article? He said, okay. I wrote 3, and one about the ceaseless source of inspiration Elvis was to me when I was growing up was described by a DJ on Irish National Radio as the best he'd read about Elvis's death. I decided to write a book based on that article. As it transpired, I never finished the book, which was called In Search of Elvis. And one reason the book was never finished is because after I returned to journalism in 1985 as an interviewer, which incidentally I decided to become purely to track down my music heroes to talk with, after one such conversation with Leonard Cohen left me feeling positively transcendent. I found that the subject of Elvis surfaced time and time again. Some interviewees, such as Bono from U2, even gave me exclusive interviews about the influence Elvis had on their lives. Maybe someday I'll finish the book. But in the meantime, I've decided to base a series of podcasts called In Search of Elvis on both the original book and subsequent interviews. What follows is one such interview. In this case, a truly memorable and moving conversation I had with Gordon Stoker from Elvis's backing vocal group, the Jordanaires. The interview took place in 1990, and one part I found particularly intriguing, simply because my father, who was a Sinatra fan, and I often had arguments about who was the best singer. As a teenager, I even got a bootleg tape of Elvis on the Welcome Home Elvis TV show Sinatra hosted in 1960. But Gordon Stoker gave me an insight into the recording of that TV show, and here he tells the tale as it had never been told and has not been told since. In other words, Gordon Stoker claimed that Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack were condescending when it came to Elvis, his musicians, and the Jordanaires. By the way, if you want to read some of my articles, check out my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com.
Of course, naturally, he wondered how long am I going to be around? This guy, even when he got out of the service, he thought his career was through when he got out of the service.
Right.
I think that's so funny now when I think about it. And of course, what was even funnier, bless his heart, Bill Black, who had been his bass player for all those years, had 2 records in the top 10 when he got out of the service. You know, Bill Black combo.
That's right, yeah.
He was very big, and we all went to a big party down at Elvis's house. When Elvis got out of the service and got his discharge, we all go to a big party, and here come Bill Black, and, big deal, Big, I'm a big star now all of a sudden, and he was. He had 2 of the top 10 at that time, Bill Black combo, and Elvis didn't have one. Right. And of all things, when Bill Black walked up to Elvis, he said, "Yeah, man," he said, "I always try to help you, he wouldn't let me." That's exactly what he said with it. And Elvis turned over, "Yes, son of a bitch."
But did you ever see that side, the darker side of his nature, which later seemed to take over from 70? Yeah.
Yes, I saw the darker side during the Frank Sinatra deals when we did that Frank Sinatra show. He didn't think that he was up to the Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr.
Caliber. Right.
He didn't. That he felt that I'm just not up to their level, and I'm not experienced to that. And they put him down a little bit too.
Do they?
Yes.
Why, vocally, or just because of who he was?
They could put him down with a look. He was extremely sharp.
Right.
If he said something to you and you didn't think much of it, or you didn't think much of him, a certain look on your face told him.
Right.
And he would. It was very obvious. Of course, Sammy Davis Jr. later became very close to him, but that was just to use him.
Sammy?
Yeah, that was just to use Elvis. Elvis gave him a beautiful, expensive ring,
Right.
a bunch of things like that. That was just to use him.
And what about Frankie and Joey Bishop and Dino and all those? Did they?
It was a thing that I wonder. I would love to have heard their conversations when we
Right.
were not around.
Right.
I'd
Right.
love to have heard what they said when they all went over to a bar and we were not with
Right.
him because he
Right.
Elvis didn't drink
Right.
and he wouldn't go to
Yeah.
the bar with
Yeah.
him. I
Was-
wonder.
Sinatra had said that rock and roll was music for cretinous goons. I mean, that's the most famous quote he ever made in the 50s. Said it was a bunch of hicks were making it. So I think he may have had
He
his...
thought that we were a bunch of hicks, I can assure you.
And they were the clan and all.
That's the reason that I always give Ed Sullivan, what Ed Sullivan said, I give him praise for what he said about Elvis Presley, because I think that was the thing that did more to establish his career than any other remark that was ever made about Elvis Presley. When he walked over to us on the set,
Yeah.
that's the first time I guess we'd met him.
Yeah.
You know, with our first show, he was sick.
That's
The
right,
second
yeah.
show,
Charles
the second
Lawton
show
did
he
it.
walked over, that's the first time we met him, because
Right.
Ed didn't show up for the dress rehearsal from what have you.
All
He
right.
only came for the real show.
All right. Right. Right.
He had it down
Good
so
job
fast.
if you can get it.
That's right. That's the first time we met him. But you know, he walked over
Right.
to us and shook hands with him. And but you know, my boys are always kidding me about. I was standing directly between Ed Sullivan and Elvis, and my
Yeah.
boys would always say the big three.
All right.
Anyway, he said this boy is
Right.
really all right. This boy, you know,
Right.
he made the remark, and of course Ed Sullivan was like God in those days.
Sure,
And
yeah.
people loved Ed Sullivan.
Yeah.
And he did more to spread a good name for Elvis Presley
Right.
than any other one person.
Is it not true that Elvis said though on stage when he was giving a summation of his life in '69, and I'm going out of the side of my mouth, you son of a bitch?
I didn't. He said what?
That Elvis would thought maybe Ed was being hypocritical, that this was just for show, and he's kind of saying out the side of his mouth, son of a bitch. That he
No.
didn't mean it. No, that's
No.
right. It was genuine.
Listen, we made a real impression on Ed
Right.
Sullivan. Let me
Right.
tell you the reason I think that. 2 years later, my wife and I were in Miami at the Hilton Blue Hotel, and I don't know what Ed was doing there, but he was there. He was standing out by the bar by the swimming pool. We're talking to 2 or 3 men, and I said to
Right.
my wife, and we were sitting out in the sun, and I said to my wife, "There is Ed Sullivan, and I have got in some way to get around, to weave
Right.
myself around
Right.
and speak to him. I expected him to say, get lost, get out of my way,
Sure.
boy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been disappointed. And he said, yeah, hey, son, get
Yeah.
out of my way.
Yeah.
But I didn't. But he didn't. I walked straight over to him when I got a chance, when somebody kind of loved him, they were talking. I walked over to him and stuck my hand out, and he said, I know who you are. You're one of Elvis Presley's boys. Shocked me to death. 2 years later, with
Right.
as many men, as many
Sees.
people as this man sees, he knew who I was.
Right.
I'll never forget
Right.
it.
Right. I think part of the thing I read though, maybe Sinatra. I know Sinatra hated rock and roll. He thought it was all bass.
Right?
And also, you got to talk about the stuff that Tin Pan Alley
Well,
had in the
Sinatra can't
past.
sing a rock and roll song.
Well, that's the other side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he knew it was beyond his capability.
Right.
And when he tried in the '60s, he starts doing things like
Right.
Winchester Cathedral. He made a mockery of himself. But there was also the thing like Tin
There's
Pan.
nothing wrong with that. But what he sings is very well. Go
Oh,
ahead.
he's beautiful. Yeah, no. But with what he does, but that doesn't mean he should put down anybody
That's
else that doesn't
exactly
do what
right.
he does.
This person could sing anything. Go ahead.
Right. No, but I just thought 2 readings just to kind of suggest to you out of that one. Number one, the power base in music had been Tin Pan Alley before Elvis and everybody moved it down south. Sinatra had a lot of money invested in the music business on every level. And also, I believe he had to pay out of his own pocket part of what Parker was asking for that show. So maybe he had, he had his own personal financial reasons to be.
Sinatra knew also that having person on that show, what kind of a rating you get too.
He desperately needed that at the time,
He
didn't
needed
he?
it, and that's so as long as it's broad.
Right. Elvis, Sinatra then recorded "Love Me Tender" a couple of years ago in tribute to Elvis. Would you accept that as a real tribute, or did he change his mind throughout the years?
Well, Sinatra had to recognize the fact of what Presley did for
Right.
the music scene, period.
Right,
And there's
right.
many things that
Right.
that I'd like you to mention on behalf of Elvis. Sinatra never demanded that whoever played the piano, whoever played the organ, whoever played the drums, the vocal backing, who was the engineer,
Oh,
who
right,
made the pictures
right.
in the front of the album.
Right.
Presley who fought tooth and nail to give. He said, I want everybody who works on this album to get credit on the back covers. And in the beginning, they
Didn't
thought
want that.
They even, he wanted our name, Elvis Presley with the Jordan Nash, to be on the recordings. And
Right.
even RCA
Right.
went about that on the very. If you pick up right now, you pick up a recording of "Don't Be Cruel" and "Hound Dog," and our name will not be on it
All right.
because he couldn't. He fought Steve Shows, and that was such a hit. He said, "I want the damn name on my record when the next record come out," and on the second recording,
Right. It's there.
it's there.
Right.
But Elvis, this guy fought for it. This
Right,
guy fought.
right,
He
right.
was the first person that insisted that all people's names be mentioned on the back of an
Right.
album. And I can assure you, Frank Sinatra never.
Hi, Joe Jackson here again. I thank you for listening to this edition of the Joe Jackson Interviews podcast. Don't forget, you can subscribe to my podcast on a range of podcast services such as Podbean or on YouTube, and thus be informed of future episodes when they're released. And you can check out my articles on my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com.